Okay, so today we are going to explore the topic of cell structure. Now, you probably already know that all living things are made up of tiny cells. In one way, we can call them that they are the building blocks of every organism on this planet. So, let us try to understand how different organisms have different cell structures. Now, cells could either be prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Could you explain what is the difference between the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells?
Well, the eukaryotic cells are the complex and they include all the animals and the plant cells. And prokaryotic cells are smaller, simpler, and they include something like bacteria.
Now, you talked about the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Could you explain the typical structure of an animal cell?
So, an animal cell contains subcellular structures like nucleus, cytoplasm, cell membrane, mitochondria, ribosomes.
What does a nucleus do?
It contains a genetic material that controls the activities of the cell.
What is the role of cytoplasm in an animal cell?
A cytoplasm is a gel-like substance when most of the chemical reaction happens. It contains enzyme that controls these chemical reactions.
What is the role of a cell membrane in an animal cell?
Well, the cell membrane holds the cell together and controls what goes in and out of the cell.
The next you talked about was mitochondria. What does a mitochondria do? What is its role in an animal cell?
That is the most important because it is where the reaction or the respiration happens. So it is where the respiration actually converts the glucose into the energy.
The last part you mentioned were ribosomes. Can you elaborate on the role of ribosomes in the animal cell?
So these are the places where proteins are made in the cell.
Now, can you also describe the typical structure of a plant cell?
So the plant cells has all the bits of the animal cells, but a few extras. The few extras are cell wall, permanent vacuole, and chloroplast. The cell wall is a rigid structure which is made up of cellulose. It supports and strengthens the cell. Even the cells of an algae have that rigid cell wall. The permanent vacuole is what contains the cell sap. It is a weak solution of sugar and salt. And the last one, the chloroplast, is where the photosynthesis occurs, which makes food for the plant as well as for the animals. They contain a green substance or a green dye called chlorophyll, which traps the sunlight needed for photosynthesis.
So, we talked about the plant cells. Now, could you highlight some of the similarities and the differences between the plant and animal cells?
Well, as I already said, the plant cell has all the bits of the animal cell plus three extra: the cell wall, the permanent vacuole, and the chloroplast. So even in the plant cell, we have respiration taking place. So we have the mitochondria. But along with mitochondria, we also have a chloroplast where photosynthesis takes place. That is missing in the animal cell. The plant cell does have a cell wall along with the cell membrane, which is not present in an animal cell. And lastly, the animal cell does not contain the permanent vacuole, which the plant cell has.
Now, bacterial cells are one of the most simplest cells that we know of. Can you describe the structure of a typical bacterial cell?
So, a bacterial cells are generally a prokaryotic cells. It has a cytoplasm. It has a cell membrane surrounding it, but it does not contain any nucleus or a true nucleus. Instead, it has a single strand of DNA that floats freely in the cytoplasm. It also contains one or more small rings of DNA called plasmids for gene transfer, which are mainly for the antibiotic resistance.
Which part of an animal cell controls its activity?
It would be nucleus.
Where do most of the chemical reactions take place in a cell?
It takes place in the cytoplasm.
What are mitochondria needed for in a cell?
It's where the respiration takes place, which converts glucose into energy.
Name 3 things that a plant cell usually has that an animal cell doesn't.
That would be a cell wall, permanent vacuole, and chloroplast.
What is a plasmid?
It is one or more small rings of DNA which are used for a gene transfer, mainly of the antibiotic resistance.